Talk about the S&P. So you guys have been here a long time, and we're just now getting to S&P. So fear and greed index. I want to talk about this. Um, now, this is important because in this type of an environment, this this type of an outlook on the market, I believe, is a hallucination. So what do I mean by that? Well, when we talk about hallucinations, it's something like this. So we have the natural versus the unnatural forces. So we have the unnatural forces. This is going to be what I call a hallucination. Okay, so what do I mean by that? Well, the Fed is getting very strong right now. So what happens is when we have these types of setups like fear and greed, it doesn't matter. So the idea, so for those of you who aren't aware of how this works, this is what's called a contrarian signal. So the idea is that when we get out here to greed and extreme greed, that the market's at a top. And that can generally be true when the Fed's not involved. Also, when you have situations like this in the market and everybody has one expectation for the market, it can't turn, right? So either one of those two things. If everybody's watching this indicator and believes it, it can't work. And number two, when the Fed is there, it's just a hallucination. Why is this important? Because we look at the markets, and if we're bearish, let's just say, we're going to look like subconsciously, we're going to look for everything that fits our bias. So we're going to say, oh, look at the fear and greed. It's in the sell, and look at this. And there's this thing called the magazine cover indicator where, if the magazine cover has like an extreme view, that the opposite's going to happen. So for example, like, there's a magazine on Time magazine, it's like the end of oil, when oil was, and it was like that was the oil is going to be gone, and then they found all this new oil, or whatever, or the hemline indicator in the 60s when the skirts would get really high on the skirts on the women. That was the top of the bull market. And in the depression, when they had these long dresses and everybody dressed conservative, that was the bear market. Well, guess what? First of all, if everybody's looking for that stuff, it's not going to work. Secondly, these are all hallucinations now. These are not trading systems. So I got to warn you this. I see so many people showing me, look at the record margin of the fund managers and the record this and the record flows into ETFs and everybody's doing this and that's got to be bearish and it's the most in history. Those are hallucinations. Those are not trading systems. Okay, there's a big difference. So with the Fed involved, so why is this confusing? Because in the past, this stuff worked. This stuff worked. When we looked at money flow and margin flows into these funds and ETFs, that stuff worked. When we looked at put to call ratios in the past, that stuff worked, right? It worked. So it's confusing because people say, well, I'm going to do my research. I'm going to look into the past. I'm going to look back into the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. And I'm going to do all this data. And I'm going to tell you that then when this happened, the market did this. Well, guess what? Since 2009, when the Fed got involved with this market, none of that stuff matters. None of it matters. I put it here for subscribers to see. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's record flows into funds and ETFs. It doesn't matter if this indicator here during the phases of quantitative easing, the extreme greed, that stayed at these levels for like 97%, for super long, for like years when the Fed was involved. It's a hallucination. And the problem with this too is that of course it's going to turn eventually, right? Of course, right? Of course the market does these cycles. And so you're going to look at that and you're like, oh, look, the extreme greed was at 96 when it turned. Yeah, but you didn't factor into the count that you had to wait a year and a half for that thing to turn, right? Are you going to wait a year and a half? And this is the same problem with cycles. If you have a big cycle, right? The problem is that unless you're in there trading, you have a big cycle like this, and if this cycle lasts for a year at a time, if the cycle can shift a little bit of this way or this way, you're talking about 4 or 5 months that you got to wait for that thing to turn. You're going to wait that long? So this is largely a hallucination. Look at all the people. I've never seen this before, blah, blah, blah. Of course you've never seen this before because nobody's ever seen the Fed do this. Of course. Like these markets are like half machine, half man now. Okay? So all this stuff that people did, hemline indicator, magazine cover, fear and greed, contrarian, it doesn't matter right now because the Fed's so strong. So again, this is a hallucination. Don't get caught in hallucinations. There's a bias. If you're bearish, you're going to look for people who are like if you're an alcoholic, you're going to look for people to go drink alcohol with, right? If you're a smoker, you're going to look for people to smoke with, right? If you smoke weed, you're going to look for people to go smoke weed. You know, I'm talking about bad vices here, bad habits. This is a bad habit to try to look for people that agree with your viewpoint. Okay? You should be trying to do the opposite. Okay? But this is what people do, and they surf and oh my God, I'm short. Let me find some people that are short in the market. Let me see. Look, I'm just telling you. I post this stuff so you guys can see it, but it's a hallucination right now. It doesn't matter. What does matter? Well,